the webinar. This is part of the Faculty of Economics Dis Natalis. Betul Pak Teguh ya, it's the 71st year of our beloved Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia. And this is part of a series of events that we are undertaking to commemorate and to celebrate our beloved faculty. So this afternoon, we have a very interesting topic that is not very often discussed in our department or faculty, is the economics and business solutions for sustainable fashion, right? So amongst Universitas Indonesia students, probably the economics students are not regarded as the fashionable people, but we want to discuss how can we contribute through our work in business, in policy making, so that the fashion industry, the apparel industry is more sustainable. Before we start, let me invite our Dean, Dr. Teguh Dartanto, to give opening and welcoming remarks. Pak Teguh, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon for Indonesian participant and for Charmian, and for Sara and Nikki, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, peaceful greeting to us all. Thank you very much for, again, to Charmian Love, the co-founder and activist in resident at BLEF UK and the social entrepreneur in resident at the School Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Oxford University, Saïd Business School, Sara, Arnold, one of the key leader in the Extinction Rebellion movement and co-founder of Fashion Act Now, Dr. Rima, Prama, Artha, lecturer of the FEPU and the senior researcher at the Danareksa Research Institute, our distinguished moderator, Ibu Lydia Napitupulu, and all the participants in this webinar. I have honor to welcome all of you to this event and to open our discussion on business and economic solution for sustainability, focusing on the fashion and the retail industry. This is in the morning. I also have the interview with the media about the circular economy. I think this is very fit with us. The morning we talk about this, and the afternoon we have the discussion with the practitioner and also those people who are doing the circular economy. In the wake of the COP26 and the extremely important for establishing sustainable business practice, particularly in the countries such as Indonesia, dialogue, discussion, and knowledge sharing cross-border on issues of the environment are a key to discovering solutions to the challenges we are all facing today. This webinar, I am to bring together academic and practitioners from the UK, Oxford University, and Universitas Indonesia, who have dedicated their career toward finding sustainable solutions within the business, particularly focusing on the fashion and the retail industry. In this discussion, we hope to highlight the challenges we are all facing together with regard to our offer the consumption, flash and the fast fashion, and the detrimental environment effect this practice have, before importantly pinpointing concrete solution toward mitigating the impact of these challenges on our environment. I think distinguished colleagues and participants, I think so we have to acknowledge the recent 2021 report on the social and economic impact of the circular economies in Indonesia, published by Indonesia Ministry of National Development in collaboration with UNDP and the Embassy of the Denmark, highlight the importance of implementing environmentally conscious policy, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The aim should be for policy to put together both people and the environment at the center state when they are formulated and implemented. I think today this good time to have the discussion about this issue, and we hope or we hear from the expert from Indonesia and also to expert from UK, so we can share the issue or the implementation of this movement. We call that circular economy. We hope that this discussion will be start of further discussion to come between UK and Indonesian scholar on the solution for our environment and also mainstreaming the issue of the circular economy in Indonesia. It is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker and to all participants to this very important webinar. I eagerly anticipate the discussion we will have today, even it's very short. I hope this will be provide us the insightful information and implementation of the circular economy in the fashion and retail industry. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Pak Teguh, for giving us a background why we should care about sustainable fashion, sustainability also in general. So without further ado, let's start on our discussion. So I would like to let everyone know that we will do a couple of rounds of questions with our panelists, and then we will have a Q&A session, of course, at the end. And also in between, I will put some link to some questions, and you can fill it out online. So you can also give us feedback on some issues that we are discussing today. So I will introduce the panelists as we come to them. You also heard Pak Teguh mention the panelist background, but also I believe you can also Google who are these people, who are presenting this afternoon. But I'd like to invite the first person to pose a question. Rima Prama Artha is also a lecturer at our Department of Economics at the faculty. So some of you may have Ibu Rima as your lecturer. Right now, Ibu Rima is also the chief economist at the Danareksa Research Institute. And for our other panelists, Danareksa is an investment management company, one of the largest, the top largest companies in Indonesia. Previous to this, Rima was the country economist for the United Nations Development Program in Indonesia. So Rima, my first question will be to you. We know that many times the newspapers, media in Indonesia will mention that Indonesian emission from people in Indonesia is relatively low compared to developed countries, USA and UK and Japan and other developed countries. So in this case, should we in Indonesia, including students, for example, who are just starting on their independence, journey for independence, finding their personal fashion and style, should we be worried about the environmental impacts of our fashion choices?
Yes, thank you, Mbak Lydia. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I know that it seems unfair, if like we emit less emission, but we have the same responsibility. But when we are talking about this emission and impact to the climate change, and it actually affected everyone, including people in Indonesia. So I think it's become our all responsibility. And then whether it's affected our choice on fashion or not, I rather see in the point of industry rather on choice, because as we know that most of Indonesia, before the COVID, 40% of people, it's like slightly just slightly above the poverty line. So and now maybe become 60%. So most of people in Indonesia think fashion not as an option or choice. So it's more on like how they can afford this kind of a product. So the most important thing, of course, like making people more aware about sustainable fashion choice is important, but one of the most important thing is making all these sustainable fashion product affordable. So all the policy and also all the infrastructure supporting that, it's needed. And of course, not only because of that, there are also several reasons that could back up, like one of the study that mentioned by Pak Teguh. I was part of the team that to explore the potential of circular economy in Indonesia, and textile is one of the industry that highlighted in that study, because textile have this circular economy potential and as well as the economic potential. And the study predict that within 9 years in 2030, the waste from the textile industry will be increased about 70%. So can you imagine now like 88% of the fashion waste in Indonesia, it end up either in landfill, and small amount of it is go to incinerator. Only around 12% that being recycled. So a lot of resource that used to develop this product, like it's going to waste, right? Like water, and then also the energy and everything. So that's why we need to rethink how to make all the fashion more sustainable. And also the last one is also Indonesia is one of the top country in textile producer. So the waste that we produce is not only post production or like from the consumer, but also during the process on developing the product. And one of the very famous polluted river like the Citarum, one of the major cause is because of this textile industry around it. So I guess it's very important this is shape all the policy and also people choice when they have, because in the long run, if we keep this business as usual, it will be do more harm from us rather than giving more benefit. I guess, yeah, the perspective should be not only from the choice perspective, but also how to make this affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rima. So you raised a couple of important points, I think, leading also to my next question, which will go to Charmian Love, which is, okay, there is personal choice, but also it's very important to invite or ask the business sector to also contribute to finding solutions. So Char, you are this is very interesting for me, the social entrepreneur in residence at the school center at Oxford University. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And also you work with international and also global businesses at finding solutions for sustainability, not only in the fashion sector. Can you tell us more a little bit about that? But before you answer, I would like to invite, now we have more than 40 people in the room. Tell us, what do you think when you hear the word sustainable fashion? What comes up in your mind? So I have put a link in the chat box. If you click it, you are brought to a website. You can write what you think about when you hear the word sustainable fashion. Okay, Char, go ahead, please.
Oh, well, thank you. I want to click on the button now, and I want to start filling it in, but I'm super interested in hearing what comes to mind for everyone who's on the line here today with those words, sustainable fashion. So I'll be excited to see the results here. Maybe I'll speak from two perspectives, if that's okay. One is you very kindly mentioned my role at Oxford as a social entrepreneur in residence. As part of that, I teach a business MBA class for business students, and that class originally was called the circular economy. We started it about 4.5 years ago, actually. Now it's called the regenerative and circular economy, how to do business in a climate emergency. And we spend a lot of time actually talking about the fashion industry. So I might reflect a little bit on some of the things that we discuss in that class relating to business model innovation that we see happening. Although I really do want to put a giant disclaimer and caveat here, which is the work that I've been doing is mostly focused on the UK. And so some of the examples I will use are UK based. And I just want to really acknowledge that there is, I absolutely know, a really profound difference in sort of the different regions where these different business models work. I won't try to pretend to speak to a region that I don't know as much about, but I will share the stories for you to then think about ways in which they might be adapted or relevant to the particular context in which you guys are operating. So I'll share some of those stories. And then I also have this role at B Lab UK, which is the B Corp movement. And actually that kind of blends in here a little bit, because actually what B Lab represents is a movement of businesses that are working explicitly in order to deliver returns both to their shareholders, but also to a wider group of stakeholders. And it's legally hardwired into the articles that legally direct how the business operates. So I'll share a couple of examples of the B Corps that are working in the fashion industry that represent some of this business model innovation that we're seeing. I'm seeing Lydia nod her head, so I'm hoping that that's the right sort of stream of feedback that will be relevant for this particular conversation.
I'm happy with that stream, yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, I will be brief because I also am really excited to hear from Sara and the other line of questioning that I know Dr. Rima Prama Artha is going to reflect on as well. So please also signal if I speak too quickly. Sometimes when I get really excited about things, I get really excited and I speak quickly. But so if you'd like me to slow down, just indicate. The first thing that I wanted to just really briefly reflect on is when we think about the fashion industry, we often think about it as being part of a creative industry, right? It's about the creativity of fashion and making, design. And actually one of our wonderful B Corps, Cressy, who works at an organization and actually is the co-founder of a company called Elvis and Cressy, she had this really interesting frame. She said, we should be stripping the title of creator from any organization which is actually destroying the planet. In other words, the language of creation and creator should only be used for those that are creating impact, creating positive externalities. And I think that that's a really important framing for the industry overall. Is how do we make sure we're moving it in a direction towards what Paul Pullman would call like net positive? In other words, positively contributing to the world and to the people who are living in it. And I think the fashion industry and this idea of creatives recapturing that language and using it not just because you're creating stuff, but because you're creating stuff that actually creates, again, these positive externalities. Now, the exciting thing is that there is some really interesting innovation that we're seeing at a business model level in the fashion industry. And so 4 of the models we talk a lot about at Oxford in this class. One is where we see fashion industry looking more at ways in which they can, prolong the life of the different sort of pieces of clothing by encouraging people to repair and then resell pieces of clothing. So Patagonia is a great example of a company that actually has really leaned into this approach in order to sort of prevent waste materials going into landfills. They also obviously want to make sure that materials that are being used are as environmentally safe as possible. And again, creating that durability of the products. And so they have a whole platform called War and Wear, which allows people to invest in clothing that may have already been worn once before, but has been expertly repaired in order for it to be resold. And I want to flag that because I think there's something here about it's creating different forms of jobs. It's not just about the manufacturing, but it's learning how to repair in order to have those products be ready for resale at a high quality level. So that's one interesting business model innovation. The second one actually is the materials themselves that are being used and how, even if you're not making a new outdoor jacket, which is what Patagonia does, how can you use materials in order for them to be used in other forms of fashion? And I was excited today because I actually decided to wear a blazer that actually was a reflection of a business model that one of my students a few years ago started from India. And what she did was she found that there were a lot of saris that were not used or were not being used, in the way that they were meant to be. And so she took the saris and created these beautiful jackets out of them, so that there was, again, an ongoing use. So again, it's looking at materials and how materials could be reused and applied to different sort of clothing styles in order to, again, prevent the waste. And again, I'd say, that is a place where there will be different forms of skills that are needed to do that. Here in the UK, we're also seeing rental of clothing increasing. So in particular, luxury goods. There's an organization called HER, which is not a certified B Corporation, but one I'm certainly watching because it reflects, I think, a changing perception and culture, which is you don't have to own something. You can rent it for example, a fancy event you might have, or something that you're doing. And that's an interesting business model. I haven't seen it scale yet to a wider range of products, but I think that's coming. And I think, again, there will be a need to really understand the sharing economy and how that can be used. So that's another interesting business model. And then the last one I would say, and this kind of links hopefully to Sara, and I would say hi to Sara because I follow her and I think she's amazing, is where and how organizations in fashion industry is actually drawing awareness to the climate emergency. And one of our B Corps is a company called Finisterre. And what they've done is they are an outdoor clothing company similar to Patagonia, but as part of one of their big campaigns they ran earlier this year, they actually created an ocean activist training camp because they felt really strongly that their people and the people that are interested in their brand want to take action when it comes to really addressing these interconnected emergencies we're facing. And, they put on a really fantastic set of programming to help people feel empowered around the decisions that they could make. And what's interesting about that is that that's a business who's saying, actually, we know this is a systemic challenge, and we know, it's people are going to have to engage in it, and have created this sort of platform to help train people on how to engage in that way. So I'll stop there. I realize I've spoken for longer than I was supposed to, but hopefully that idea of, being a creator, not a destroyer, and just 4 very sort of small little vignettes of the types of innovation we're seeing here in the UK might be of help and of interest to those of you who are interested in pursuing this further.
That's great. Thanks a lot for that insight. I know a lot of our attendees here are business students. The Faculty of Economics and Business at UI is very well known for its business program, and I hope you can have some insight from this to tailor for your research. And also, when you are a leader, hopefully we are hoping that you will all be leader in your respective fields, that you will think and draw on this experience and models for your in your managing of companies and in your work. So I would like to move next to Sara. I also, when I heard about all the great things that Nikki mentioned about you, I check her out on social media and so on. So Sara is an activist. I guess I would boil down to it. Activists for sustainability, not only in fashion, but also in terms of our consumption choices, making us aware that when we consume in economics, one of the basic economic principle is more is better. Yeah, so it's one of the axiom in microeconomics that I teach is more is always better. So, but we need to be, I guess, conscious of our consumption. So Sara is attached with Extinction Rebellion and Fashion Act Now. So Sara, what I would like to ask is, you work with a range of stakeholders, getting them involved and advocate for more sustainable fashion industry, amongst others. Can you tell us more about this? But before we get to you, I see that people have filled in the mentee. What do you think of sustainable when you hear the word sustainable? So can you see that? Eco-friendly product, recycling of materials. So nothing, usually in a word cloud, if there is something like big, that the same thing that people are talking about, it will be a big cloud. But I guess these are all relatively evenly distributed. Some people don't know yet. So I hope through this activity, you will have some idea or some conviction of what is sustainable fashion. So organic materials, recycling, and recycling again, regeneration. So I'll stop now. You can still fill this out, but I'll stop now and let Sara tell us about your work.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that introduction. And I just want to firstly say how nice it is to see some of those words coming up, and that, you know, as it's been mentioned before, it's not just about circular, it's about regenerative, and seeing those words coming up, that it's not just recycling, but also organic. And I also want to start by saying how much I love this thing of, you know, the creator needs to be somebody that's doing something good for the world, and the destroyer shouldn't be allowed to use that word, creator. So yes, I have quite an unconventional job. I am an activist. So maybe I should tell people a little bit about the journey and how I became an activist. I studied business. I also, before that, studied fashion design at Central St. Martin's. And from that started a fashion rental company because I wanted to incentivize circularity. So this worked as a platform, and the idea was that it wouldn't just incentivize circularity, but it would incentivize a more creative way of working and a more circular way of working. But from that, I kind of came to this realization about how much of an emergency we're in back in 2018, when that IPCC report was put out that said we basically had a decade to put things right, or we would have runaway climate change. At that point, I came to this realization that circularity on the scale that we needed it would not be achieved without serious intervention from our government, serious incentives, and really what I would think of as a crisis response. And therefore, we needed a lot more pressure to make that happen. At that point, I decided to get involved. I kind of came across an article saying that there was this movement that was going to start called Extinction Rebellion, and they were going to use civil resistance or civil disobedience, direct action, whatever term you want to call it. And I thought, okay, this is what is needed right now in this emergency situation that we find ourselves in. So because I'm essentially an environmental justice activist, I come from the perspective in that my interest is, and I'm sure everyone's interest really, is that ultimately my interest is protecting our planet, which is our life support system, for the sake of the well-being of all people. And I work within the fashion industry because, one, that's what I know, but two, that it is on a trajectory to have a serious, well, I mean, it already is having a seriously bad impact on our planet. So within Extinction Rebellion, I ran two major campaigns, one called the Boycott Fashion campaign. And this was asking people to not buy new clothing for a whole year, which to some people would be like, okay, that's really quite easy to do. And for some people, it's really quite difficult to do. And I would say that, you know, we're talking about the consumer, but really because this was called Boycott Fashion, it was really about coming together as a collective, as a provocation to the industry to say, we don't need all of this overproduction. And then from there, we ran another campaign called Cancel Fashion Week. So we actually asked the British Fashion Council to cancel London Fashion Week. And we held meetings with them. We gave them talks about climate change. We asked them to take on a crisis response, to cancel it, but then to use the platform that they had to instead hold talks about sustainability. So it really changing the nature of what London Fashion Week is. So we, obviously they didn't cancel it. So we held protests outside London Fashion Week. And we really wanted them to get to grips with what fashion is, that it is an industry based on excess. And the Fashion Week system is really kind of, it's a platform for that excess. And whilst they are bringing in more sustainable practices and they now have a positive fashion space, it really still this idea of renewing your wardrobe every 3 or 6 months is not something that I feel is compatible with the emergency situation we find ourselves in. So from there I set up Fashion Act Now as a continuation of the work that we were doing within Extinction Rebellion, because within Extinction Rebellion, we're not meant to go into details about what exactly we feel the industry should be doing. So we created another arm essentially to do that work. And as Fashion Act Now, we really believe that drastic measures are needed at this time of crisis. And I think it's important to note that as we've come out of COP26 and there have been significant progress from COP26, but actually the policies that we have coming out of it, even with that progress, still take us towards 2.7 degrees of global warming. And this is completely catastrophic. But even in the best case scenario, we're still heading, absolute best case is 1.6 degrees. We see at 1.5 degrees that there'll be a 90% reduction in coral reefs. And in a country like Indonesia, so many people are relying on coral reefs to provide the fish that they need to eat. This is a disaster. So we believe that we need civil resistance and we need radical ideas. So my work is really, I guess, on the peripheries of the industry. We work with anthropologists, economists, ecologists, speculative designers, activists. We take inspiration from indigenous people fighting for justice. And what we've been working on over the last year is a concept that we call defashion. And that is the role that fashion needs to play in degrowth. So why do we feel this concept is needed? We feel it's needed because we feel that there is this big elephant in the room that nobody really wants to get to grips with, that it is an industry based on excess and continued growth. And while the circular economy is, in theory, is really great, in practice, we are seeing that the fashion industry is using the circular economy to continue business as usual. So it's also interesting that the circular economy, in a way, is a kind of rebranding of what we used to call as reduce, reuse, and recycle. And that it always seems to be that the recycling and reducing part gets more the recycling and reusing part gets more attention than the reducing part. And also, you know, we can look back in not too long ago, and that the concept of recycling was promoted by the plastics industry so that they could flog the idea of disposable plastic products. Because when they first started putting out disposable plastic products, people weren't throwing it away. They were keeping it and reusing it. And this wasn't very good because they wanted to use a lot of virgin plastics. They wanted to have a market for the virgin plastics. And so they had to teach people, they had to run campaigns to teach people, no, you throw it away. So they said, okay, you recycle it, which then led people to throwing it away. And we see within however many decades it's been, there's still a huge amount of disposable plastics not being recycled, but being disposed of. And you also see that, you know, the kind of global fashion agenda's circularity program, it's partnered with fast fashion companies So again, it's being used by fast fashion companies to continue business as usual. So the elephant in the room is that the industry is too large and we somehow need to shrink it. But when you shrink an industry, it can, we've seen in through COVID, that if you shrink an industry very quickly, then vulnerable people are left without their wages paid. So then we need to look at the structure of our economy. So we need to switch to a well-being economy. And we need to switch from just talking about efficiency to talking about sufficiency and talking about true justice. So yes, we need circularity, but we also need regenerative. We also need justice. So we have a vision for post-fashion that is really based on the commons. And it's based on that creation of an economy based on sufficiency, care, respect, justice. And I've probably talked far too much, so I'll hand over back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the time difference between us and the UK and also the time constraints of the speakers led us to just an hour of this. And also Shar will need to leave by 5 p.m. So what I would like to invite is if anyone has a question for Shar, if you can write it in the Q&A box or raise your hand, we'll call on you to pose your question. But in the meanwhile, let me pose, Sara mentioned excess. I'm guilty of excess. How guilty are you with excess? So another Mentimeter for you. You can click in the chat box. I have a few questions. How many of these things you have? How many shoes? How many clothes? How many accessories, bags, and so on? It's anonymous, so we won't know, but let's look at it. Yeah, be truthful and see what do we have. So before looking at that, the answer to that, I will move to Rima. Emergency, Rima. Sara said emergency, but nobody thinks it's an emergency. In Indonesia, everybody is still very laid back, relaxed. The rivers are clogged, full of waste, and it's okay. There is flood. Oh, the flood will go away. So what will it take in terms of policy to make sure that, without government intervention, without policy intervention, I don't think things will change because people are not in that state of mind. It's an emergency.
Thank you. I think I feel guilty as well. So during the COVID, I didn't buy anything. But now since I'm getting to the office, I realized that all my clothes is not fit anymore because I stayed too long at home. So I start to buy again. Maybe I will try to reduce it.
Maybe we should swap, Rima, because my old clothes is not fitting me, but I'm sure it will fit you.
Yes, maybe we should do something like that. I think the renting and those kind of thing is growing. Pre-love thing is also growing in Indonesia, and with all the digital system that allow people to transfer things very easy. But back to your question, yeah, I guess the government play a very critical role in here, and because as well, government government of Indonesia is actually committed to all these different international agenda, right? SDG and then the COP and everything. But then the effort is like, we feel it's a bit too slow, yeah. That's why I think the movement, like what Sara did, and I think a lot of activists also in Indonesia also try to move that. So I think it should be in parallel. But back to government, a comprehensive policy needs to be rethinking, because it's not only provide incentive for the industry to be more mindful, and then also to be more produce sustainable things, but when they shifting to more like sustainable or even reducing the production, there is people that vulnerable that in line. so they lost the job. This is also need to be think like a lot of movement, like including when I was working in UNDP. Another idea is like having this UBI, Universal Basic Income, basically providing for this vulnerable for them to survive during the transition before the COVID. It's like more digital 4.0 or now like climate emergency. Those kind of thing is of course like basic social protection to protect the poor one and the vulnerable during the transition, and also incentive that to make sure another agenda maybe because our awareness is not as high as like a developed country. It will take time, including improving our curriculum and other stuff, but also to make incentive that in the right amount, like supporting all the business that have this new movement, and then also provide incentive for all the business to be more sustainable. I guess the key is having the right amount of policy, but not all gimmick. I believe, of course, like you said, that probably CE is like more labeling the things. But if we look again, even in Indonesia, the old definition of like reuse is not being implemented properly. So I guess yeah, people always like the new term and then try, but I hope the policy is more substantive and then more reflected rather than like with the new old labeling. Yeah, so it should be comprehensive enough, provide incentive for business, and as well as protect the poor and the vulnerable, so they can have option and survive like during the climate crisis. Back to you, Mbak Lydia.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's you make a good point about that we do have instruments for protecting the vulnerable. So it shouldn't be taken as an excuse for not doing anything, because we still have to do something, but we have instruments actually to protect the poor from the perverse effect or negative impacts of policy. So back to you, Shar, but I just look in the chat box that there's a question about what do you teach at Oxford so that people want to move into the sustainable mode. So that is also my question. You know, it's very great that a lot of companies are doing this voluntarily, but I tend to not believe on just waiting until someone comes up with a big idea. What can we do to push the companies so that they will undertake the options, the big ideas that we need for sustainability?
Well, it's a really wonderful question. And I think there's two questions in there that I'll try to answer briefly together. When we approach this class that we teach at the business school, as I sort of mentioned earlier, we started calling it the circular economy, but we very quickly changed the name actually as things were changing, because things are changing incredibly quickly. And Sarah's already mentioned this, you know, we don't call it circular economy anymore, we call it the circular and regenerative economy. And actually I'm really pushing for us to just call it the regenerative economy, because of how important it is for us to have the right framing and mindset when it comes to what the businesses that business models are that we need to engage in. I'll sort of give you a quick, I think the question that's come in the chat is just a little bit more around what we teach and how we teach it. We actually have, 8 modules over the course of 4 weeks. So two modules a week. The first one is we talk about different frameworks and different definitions and sort of the bigger economic landscape. So donut economics is a model we spend a lot of time talking about because Kate Raworth is also connected to Oxford, who's the author behind that concept. But we talk about, traditional economic systems, we often focus on macroeconomics and microeconomics, but actually it's so much more complicated than that. And so we spend time thinking about what meta economics look like, which is systems economics. And then we spend some time looking at mesoeconomics, which are the relationships we have with one another that are either formal or informal. And that to me is where a lot of the culture sits and a lot of the things we're talking about here. So we do that. We also very quickly move into, in our second module that week, anchoring the rest of the work around climate justice. And so we actually, and Sarah's also mentioned Indigenous wisdom, we host Indigenous elders to come in to speak to the students that are in this business program. We call it a fire circle, and it's just a chance for the students, the business students, to really understand the real breadth of wisdom that exists beyond necessarily what they would traditionally read in textbooks. And that really sets up for the further modules to be very much grounded in the very clear need for centering people and justice in the actions that we take around addressing the climate emergency, and recognizing the importance of Indigenous wisdom by really understanding it, not through an interpretation of Indigenous wisdom, but hearing directly from Indigenous elders. We then move on to sort of a more traditional approach to teaching these materials, things like we look at business model innovation. So I've shared with you earlier just sort of some of the examples of the case studies we spend time with. We look at big companies and small companies. We usually have for every module a speaker that comes in. So it's not just here's what the textbook is saying or here's what the journal articles are saying. It's like, no, here's what the practice looks like. Here's someone who actually holds this role or this responsibility in a business. And we do that for big companies and small companies and reflect on what the advantages and the disadvantages are of those different scales and sizes of organizations. And then we move into a week where we talk about the wider context. So policy making, the incentives that governments can put into place to motivate a faster transition. We talk about investment and capital flows. Those are really important things to know about. And then in the final week, we have our two last modules, and then this is getting, I think, to the heart of the question that both has been asked, but it's about recognizing when it comes to systems change, what role does business, what role does government, what role does finance, but what role do we have, and how do we bring together all these different forms of power and action into a sort of focused energy to drive systemic change. And so we spend a lot of time looking at what are the different models of collaboration and power. Let's be honest, there's these different forms of power. And oftentimes we have people from Extinction Rebellion come in to speak to the MBA students about, the role of civil disobedience, the role of movements. Now, not all the business students agree with it, and that's fine because it creates some great, tension and debate, but at least people are becoming aware of all these different models of engagement. And then our last class is actually exclusively focused on taking action. So we know one of the sort of biggest calls from activists is, there's a lot of talk, blah, blah, blah. What does it mean to do things? And so we have a dedicated class, which is wholly focused on what are you going to do about this? What is your career path? What is your 100-day plan in what you're going to do to be a creator and not a destroyer? So I hope that answered the question. And I'm sorry, Lydia, I can't see what you've put in the chat there. But if it's something that I should be addressing, just please let me know.
I just put the in Bahasa Indonesia in Indonesian. If anyone would like to pose a question in Indonesian, either you can write it, bisa ditulis di box Q&A, atau bisa ditanyakan dalam bahasa Indonesia, just to invite everyone. Sometimes they are very shy about speaking up in English, although they should be sufficient. Jadi silakan bila mau bertanya di dalam bahasa Indonesia. Thanks a lot for that. I see a question, but before we answer that, let's see how many people own. So I think it's not too bad. I would think that I am around more to the right-hand side in terms of, I guess, clothing, because, a lot of roles I teach, I consult, family and hobbies and so on. So I think this is not so bad. It's just I took a random number, sort of like 5, a modest 5, one for each day of the week. And then at the end, I put 100, so you have a different thing for every day in 3 months, but doesn't look too bad. I don't know. This is just a conversation starter. 17.8 shoes. Yeah, that's the average. That's kind of a lot. That I didn't expect that, but in clothing and accessories, I think divided between various items, it gets to be a lot. But we have 2 feet, and I am guilty of having probably more than 20 shoes. So that is an excess of probably fashion that Sara mentioned. So back to Sara again. People need stuff because they want to look fashionable. You mentioned de-fashion, but I guess we need a change in our thinking. What is being fulfilling in a fashionable and creative way, but not consuming so much stuff and buying more stuff to show our individuality or our personality and so on. So I guess my question is from the creative side, from the producer and also consumer side, how can we be fashionable, presentable, I guess more than presentable, fashionable, showing your identity, but not consuming so much stuff?
It's a very interesting question. Firstly, I think the place to start is, we use the word de-fashion, but de-fashion does not mean that we don't love clothing. It doesn't mean that we don't think people should wear nice clothes, or it doesn't, we don't want to tell people that they shouldn't express themselves in a certain way. De-fashion should be about the celebration of culture and expression. So I think maybe I should kind of unpack that a little bit. And it's interesting that you talk about the producer side and the consumer side, because our kind of vision for de-fashion and post-fashion is that those two sides kind of merge together. And I also just want to say that, Rima, it's so nice that you talked about universal basic income and social protection. I think that's super important. And then Shah is just so it gives me so much hope to hear about the breadth of what you are teaching students at the business school. So yeah, I want to unpack this idea about de-fashion. And firstly, we need to talk about, well, what really is fashion? And when we refer to fashion within Fashion Act now, we give fashion a capital F. Fashion is a construct. We call fashion the globalized dominant system. So fashion is separate from our kind of other clothing systems. So it's really this big industrial system that is spread throughout the world. And we believe this needs serious reimagining. So we believe that this fashion with a capital F is really based on certain myths. The myth that well-being, belonging, worth will come through material goods. It is also the promise of modernity and relevance. And in a way, what has happened with this fashion with the capital F is that our clothing cultures, indigenous people have clothing cultures, all humans have clothing cultures, but this has been kind of weaponized by the fast fashion and the big fashion industry. And we need to look at the roots of this and how it's actually playing out across the world. And in a way, you can see that fashion with a capital F has been used as a tool for oppression. And if we look at how that has been used in colonial times, and that really fashion was a way to create this divide between those that are fashionable, those that are modern, those that are relevant in the world, and those who are not. There was the big scandal recently in in Canada when they found mass graves of Indigenous people that had gone to these residential schools. And then if you look at what happened in the residential schools, it was that they went in there with their Indigenous dress, and then you see the pictures of them coming out when they've been stripped of their Indigenous cultures and Indigenous dress systems. So fashion was a way to divide people. And you see that fashion both creates, depends on, and it normalizes the idea of sacrifice zones, and sacrifice zones are needed for continual growth of the economy. And just to explain what a sacrifice zone is, it's when you have typically an area of land, let's say where they want to mine, and that area of land they've decided that it is disposable for the sake of economic growth. But when you look at, and I'm quoting here the work of Sandra Neeson, who is an anthropologist who wrote several books on Batak dress. And she kind of looks at sacrifice zones as being both cultural sacrifice zones as well as an area of land that is sacrificed. So the actual use of fashion, in that it divides people, and these people matter and these people don't, these people can be disposed of, and these for the sake of these people, fashion actually creates a way of normalizing that. And in that way, it is really quite destructive. And you see that, you know, it used to be that you traveled the world and you'll see people dressed differently across the world. Obviously in Indonesia, I see people wearing batik shirts. And so you still have that difference in culture and the diversity of culture within the country. But if you travel in Europe, people are all wearing pretty much the same clothes. In a sense, fashion says that it is culture, but it has eroded culture. So with all of this, we need to really understand what fashion is, and we need to reclaim our clothing culture. And so, if we take the example of Indonesia, but there are many other examples, in a way, fashion has eroded the clothing heritage that was originally sustainable and regenerative. And actually, when we're talking about circularity or regeneration, we need to recognize that those original systems of regeneration need to be protected and nurtured. And in this way, I feel that actually here in the West, we have quite a lot to learn from Indonesia, but also that Indonesia needs to really protect what is still there in terms of the diversity of culture. So circularity, I said before, could become an excuse to increase overconsumption. And it could be a way that we actually build on the same injustices of the current system that profit the few and not the many. And I feel that in Indonesia, there's kind of an opportunity to do something really amazing and to show that to the rest of the world. And that the heroes of regeneration, sustainability, not the gatekeepers of technology, but the kind of so-called ordinary people that holds that kind of cultural heritage, the skills, the knowledge. And also, I feel this sense of kind of community through clothing systems. And the role of the tukang jahit, that you still have a tailor on like every street, whereas here we're trying to rebuild those systems because they've been so eroded that we've forgotten that those people even exist. So that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly a lot of food for thought, and I think you raised an important issue about culture, bringing culture forward. Although I also now see that there is some kind of, actually, it's not backlash, but rather by promoting batik around Indonesia, whereas batik is only one cultural or unique textile in Indonesia. Other people which didn't have batik now need to buy more batik because it's something that is being fostered in Indonesia. So we have, in also orang Batak sometimes use batik, but not a lot. But increasingly now, even orang Batak go to events and use batik. There is no tradition or cultural heritage of batik. So everyone who is just joining here are probably interested to hear, wow, she's talking about Batak, because Sara used to live in Indonesia for a long time as a child, and her father actually worked for Ernst & Young. So I know a lot of people here probably want to work for EY or work for EY, so maybe you knew Sara's dad. So we are wrapping up because of time constraint, but let me take a couple of questions. One is a very straightforward question from Gianti. Are we over-consuming in fashion? Are we already over-consuming, over-consumption? So let me direct this question to Mbak Rima. Yeah, are we over-consuming? If that is the case, really we need some policy intervention so that we don't over-consume. Another question, let me just post this as well. An interesting question from Pak Zakir Mahmud. Pak Zakir is a lecturer here at the Faculty of Economics. Sara, let me pose this question to you. Do you think sustainable fashion is suitable for small and medium enterprises? Given their unique characteristics, I guess if you think about unique characteristics is that they are very small with generally not a lot of capital and also marketing reach perhaps. So is sustainable fashion something that is suitable to support for SME, small and medium businesses? Because Indonesia, in terms of businesses, it's dominated by small businesses where people work for themselves and just maybe have one or two employees, very, very micro, very small, especially if you consider or compare to Western businesses. So Rima, maybe you first.
Yeah, are we overconsume? I think it depends on the people, yeah. For middle income and rich people, maybe I think most of them is overconsume. But the problem with the poor people, like most of fashion that they buy is like a very cheap one. So the quality is not very good. So it won't long lasting. That's another problem. That's why I think it is important to have policy and movement to go to have this affordable fashion for everyone, because most of the like sustainable fashion, it has good quality and it's part of the investment for people. But of course, the production and the material is very costly. So not many people can afford that. So I guess to answer the question, it will depend. If you have more the things that you need, probably you are overconsumed. But I think in Indonesia, some of the people still not go to that level. The problem is just because this low quality, it creates a lot of waste. So they cannot even being fixed, for something that like if they lost some of the part of the cloth, probably can be fixed. But for the cheap and low quality of product, they cannot be fixed or even cannot be recycled because the material is not like something that valuable to be recycled. So I guess it depends.
I've become more aware of my consumption choice, but also to an extent, I didn't have the money to buy good quality stuff when I was younger. But now we do have enough money, and also we understand that good quality means it can be used for a long time. I'm wearing something from that my mother used to wear. If you see there is a hole underneath here, but because we are online, I don't get the hole. You cannot see the hole, but maybe when we are back open again, I will have to bring this to a tailor and patch it, and so I can use it again. Sara, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question for small and medium businesses. I mean, I think there's a big opportunity here. I think there's two sides of it. One is that the overconsumption problem, I think one of the things that we need to consider is that actually clothing can be a process that, that rather than a product. So it can be about coming together as a community, making clothes as a group, sharing skills. Maybe, you know, you can have a platform where people are sharing patterns, and then you can take those patterns to your tailor and get something made, or you can buy a sewing machine and make it yourself. I feel that maybe there needs to be this merging. Obviously, it's not for everybody, but a part of the solution needs to be this merging of consumer and maker so that we all learn those skills. But then coming back to, you know, can sustainability be achieved for small businesses? And I kind of wanted to I had this conversation with Indonesian brands called Sukacita, and they are a social enterprise. And they've been working with some villages, I think in East Java, to create clothing based on their traditional practices, but then also modernizing that. And through doing this, they realized that in that village, they weren't really producing that much food, and they were having to import cotton from China that was probably not made in a sustainable way at all. We know that a lot of the cotton comes from China actually has slave labor. So instead of importing the cotton, they actually reintroduced regenerative growing practices to that community. And so they're now producing their own regenerative cotton, but at the same time, they're producing their own food to live off. And the money that they make from selling the fabrics they create means that they have time to also spend on their own clothing cultures and to make their traditional clothes. So I just kind of wanted to give that an example that I think is really nice and that I think really works.
Right, that's interesting. I've never heard of that company, but I'll try to Google and see if I can find information about that. So sustainable fashion can create other opportunities, and in this case, producing raw materials and also focusing on food production at a local level. So a whole mixture of processes, I guess. So not the output, as you mentioned, is not the clothing, the baju, but also other processes that has gained importance in the community. That's very interesting. All right, so we are nearing the end, and I think we are over the time limit. So with that, let me close this session with a big thank you to our panelists. Sara and Rima and Shar had to go because she had some other activities, and also a big thank to Putu Geniki. Nikki is the one who connected all of us. Nikki at Oxford. So thank you, Nikki. So if you want to click on the emoji to clap or show a thumbs up, that would be appreciated. So thank you very much. And before closing, I hope that this webinar has been informative to you. My personal desire is that for students, you can also look into this area as part of your research for your scriptsy. It's a very under studied area. So if you want to do research, you have a lot of food for thought from this event. And as you go into the work industry, you also keep in mind some of the things that you hear here. So thank you again, everyone. Good luck with the rest of your studies this semester. We'll start having final exam, I think is it next week or in 2 weeks? Yeah, study hard and keep safe, keep healthy, everyone. And thanks for coming. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sara. Have a good day, the rest of your day.
Thank you, Bu
You too,
Lydia.
Nikki.
Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you, everyone. Thank you, Ibu
Thanks,
Lydia.
Ibu Herda,
Nikki. Thank you,
for
Rima.
all the terima
Thank you.
kasih
Thank
fasilitasinya.
you,
Sama-sama. I was really happy that I attended this one. Thank you, Bu Lydia. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Rima.
Yeah.
Nikki, thank you so much.
I see a lot of
Thank you,
people
Ibu.
attending
Terima
here.
kasih, Pak Teguh.
Hi,
Yes,
Elsa.
Hey,
Elsa
thank you
is
very much,
from
Nikki,
my
Sarah.
angkatan. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Pak
Mas
Teguh.
Teguh.
thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Pak Deka.
Thank you, Ibu Rima.
So,
Salam
Thank
kenal.
you. Salam kenal.
Ya, semuanya.
Terima kasih.
Selamat sore.
let me leave
Sore.
now. All right. See you guys.
Thank you.